I'm sorry for that, but we are all very pressed. I have a written a written text today because I think the occasion is very important. And I really want to express my happiness. I co-host such an interesting and an unusual event here in the European Parliament. I say unusual because in this House we tend to discuss about the present and how to shape the future, but rarely, I'm afraid, about the past. But we forget that the past history is often much more powerful. As the historians, the main historians on the panel today, will explain, it is often the way to look into our past that determines the choices we make today. I apologize for my English, but they're getting worse after Brexit, and even after Trump's triumph. I will choose in the future to speak on the beautiful Balkanian languages. So, allow me to express my admiration, really, for the work already done by this joint history project. 4 workbooks already exist, covering the most difficult of Balkan history. And lately, the Ottoman Empire's nation states in the southeast, east, and now the Balkan Wars and the Second World War. The Joint History Project, my friends, will present today 2 new workbooks, already here, covering the most recent history, including the Cold War, it's always like that, and the war in Yugoslavia. This will be the most controversial, I'm afraid, of all, for sure, and the most, perhaps, challenging part of the project. I'm really happy that somehow they are very involved, Professor Christina Koulouri, which I know and appreciate from the past, and Mr. Historian, and many other things, Costas Carras. Now, how do you even start to tell such a story to all the nations they are involved? We would soon discover, I'm afraid, that it is impossible, because we are used to learning history from an ethnocentric, it's a Greek word, point of view. Even historians from the same nations, you leave it, sometimes disagree on key events. But the historians of the Joint History Project made a brilliant, I think, choice. Perhaps I would say a groundbreaking choice. And because I was, in my good past, a professor of physics, I would call it a new relativity theory, of equal importance of that to Einstein. So, instead of trying to replace textbooks or write a coherent single version of the region's history, they chose to rewrite history through teaching methods rather than content. Why is this important? It's obvious. Because we move away from history as a tool and serves the national identity towards history that serves critical thinking and enables us to explain events as a consequence of human acts and not stereotypes. It is important because eventually we will raise better citizens who are able to understand the real dynamics of our world. This is the importance, beyond stereotypes. And to be a bit more political, citizens that are able to see through the lies of populists that use some explanations of the world for political expediency. Last, I would like to thank the contributors, the many contributors to the Joint History Project for their continuous efforts to reconcile the region. Their effort must be an example of historians, that's very important, in other parts of Europe and the world. And I will end with a simple word. Congratulations. In Greek, sichartiria. This is an ancient word which might say that we are all glad today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I think with the Greek thank you for a word for congratulations, I will pass the floor now finally, not finally, but in the end, to Professor Dr. Christina Koulouri, who is sort of the chair of the History Education Committee and editor of the 20th History Project workbooks. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't mind that historians will be the last to have the floor after the politicians. Anyway, I am tempted to refer to movies. When the Joint History Project 2 was launched, and we realized that we should actually create 2 volumes on post-war and post-Cold War history for all Southeast European countries in 2 years, we called that Mission Impossible. Well, today we can say that that Mission Impossible was accomplished, and probably the tape of our speeches will be destroyed in the end, but like in the movie, but hopefully not the books. So this mission has been carried out by a group of more than 30 historians, representing all the countries in the region, mainly academic historians who are experts in contemporary history and in history didactics. The outcome depends on a remarkable teamwork, which managed to overcome bitter memories and conflict by speaking the language of historical discipline. We believe that only high-quality, professional historical research can be used as a shield to protect societies from stereotyping the others and from developing blind nationalism. Blind nationalism has nothing to do with patriotism. Quite the opposite. It can be harmful to national interests, as our Balkan history has shown. In my short presentation, I will try to answer briefly 2 questions. First, why is it important to create alternative educational material for the teaching of the Cold War and the post-communist period, mainly the dramatic 90s? Why is it politically relevant? And the politicians of the panel have helped me to answer that question. Second, how did we create this material finally? Which were our goals and our method? The answer to the first question should be connected to a major project of peace education in the Balkans. Many scholars have analyzed the macro-historical reasons of interethnic violence and the role played by history's heavy shadow in the conflicts. History textbooks have been identified as one of the potential causes for intolerance between nations and consequently as a reason for conflict. In this respect, the reform of history education would function as a long-term policy of conflict prevention. As a matter of fact, we have to take into account that school can play 2 different, and I would say opposite roles. On the one hand, it can contribute to the reproduction of the conflict if it hashes up the dark sides of the past, especially the ones connected to atrocities committed by one's nation, or if it propagates a one-sided teaching of the controversial and traumatic events. But on the other hand, the school might be used as a tool for healing traumas, for overcoming painful memories, and for reconciliation between former enemies. So you understand that our project is exactly about the second aspect, the second role played by the school, especially in post-conflict societies. We are well aware of the pitfalls and the challenges of such an enterprise. However, as historians, but also as representatives of that generation who lived through the recent wars and the political traditions in the Balkans, we editors, historians, are more or less of the same age. I'm not going to say who is the oldest. And so we are convinced that we have to dare and undertake the responsibility to suggest how to teach these events. As John Roth argued, quote, ethical reasons are the most important ones for studying the dark chapters in history, end of quote. So we need to teach new generations how to deal with our dark pasts. This is not just a history lesson. It is also part of citizenship and human rights education. And this was my answer to the first question. About the second question, how did we create the material, goals, method, etc.? Well, this would require more than 5 minutes. But in order to answer that question, we should first give a positive answer to the question if it is possible to teach about war in order to secure peace. Well, yes. In order to prevent war, atrocities and genocides, we need to understand the beast and not to be afraid of it. Still, history is not like myths, where characters are good and bad, where the story is black and white, and where in general there is a happy end. Historical reality should be understood as a complex process, where actors cannot be easily distinguished in perpetrators and victims. The same person can be both. Therefore, our first choice in these workbooks was to keep a distance from both heroization and victimization, and to try to make students familiar with war experience as a complex phenomenon and mainly as a common human experience. The biggest challenge posed by the ideological and political baggage accompanying the narratives on the post-Cold War period, particularly in countries of former Yugoslavia. The traumatic memory of the Yugoslav wars is still alive. We cannot ignore that. It would not be an exaggeration to say that this memory haunts the teaching of history. So history teachers have to deal with the black and white interpretations that predominate in their school textbooks, the subjectivity that abounds in the public sphere, the public history, and their own personal and familial histories. We had to take into consideration all these factors when deciding about the contents and the method of the lesson on the Yugoslav wars. I would like to present very briefly how we dealt with this particular chapter. I think it is interesting. The lesson on Yugoslavia was historicized and put into the wider context of global transformation, not only a unique case, a Sonderweg of the Balkans. We have opted for a combination of the chronological and the thematic approach in order to highlight specific aspects of the wars. The first aspect is the war itself. Battles, military campaigns, war propaganda. We specifically juxtaposed documents from the two warring factions in order to show how the other is depicted and how data are distorted. The cases of biased information by national but also by international media are discussed so that students understand how to assess historical evidence. The second aspect is about human experience in war conditions, as illustrated by the chapter on the siege of Sarajevo and the one on children's lives. Documents on everyday life under sanctions in Serbia and Montenegro highlight another aspect of harsh conditions for societies at war. The third aspect is the so-called dark phase of the war. Atrocities, mainly ethnic cleansing, concentration camps, refugees, destruction of cultural heritage, the so-called cultural cleansing. This is the most sensitive part of our lessons, and we had difficulty to deal with this. Historians and pedagogues need to find a method in order to transform traumatic memory into teaching subject. In our workbooks, through documents and exercises, we invite students to understand and analyze terms like genocide and ethnic cleansing, and to compare discourses on the same events from international and local agents. The fourth aspect is about the reactions against the war, the anti-war movement inside the warring societies. mainly by women, but also by reservists and historians. We were also against the war, some of us. We want to show that Yugoslav societies were not supporting unanimously the war, as many Western stereotypes implied. You will have the chance, of course, to read Volume 2 and see how it is structured, because there are many other aspects that I cannot cover, like the international actors, courts and tribunals, etc., etc. At this point, I would like to conclude by thanking my friends and colleagues with whom we accomplished Mission Impossible. They are sitting there. Alexei, Bozo, Dubravka, Neven, and Niazi. I would like also to thank Costas Carras for his enthusiastic support for these efforts and for his critical reading of the workbooks. He was one of the reviewers. And also the members of the Center's board, who since 1999 have honored us with their confidence. Many thanks to the Center's executive director, Zvezdana Kovac, who has helped us to overcome small or big crises recently, and of course the Center staff. We have been, all of us, we have been on the same boat, because we share the same universal values, not only European or Balkan. These are universal values. And because we believe that schools should raise citizens of democratic states who would live together peacefully and not potential soldiers of rival nations. It's time to disarm history. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think this right to disarm history is a term that I will take with me from here. Now the floor is to Mr. Costas Carras, who you have been the rapporteur to the CDRSEE board for the Joint History Project.
Thank you, Chairman. This, which is the sort of concluding introduction from our side, from the people who were involved in it, should and must start with a thank you to 3 successive chairmen of the Center for Democracy and Reconciliation in Southeast Europe. 2 of them happen to be here. Matt Nimitz, who is sitting in the second row, was the chairman under whom this project was proposed and began operating. Richard Shifter was also from America, was the one under which it continued and the first 4 volumes first appeared, and Erhard Buschek, whom you have already heard, has been the 3rd in succession. Without their support, going through in a variety of ways, raising money, helping all of us involved, giving us their confidence, it could not have been completed. Remember, we have been working 20 years. It started in 1996, and we are now in 2016. That is a long time. And most of the people involved are the same as were involved in the beginning, with very, very rare exceptions. So we are a team who have worked very closely together. That is the first thing I want to say. And I need not add that, of course, I follow Christina in my admiration for the team of excellent historians, editors, and advisors who have undertaken the largest part of the task, all the others who contributed, and the staff of the Center who had to deal with some very major problems, not just major and minor, rarely very major problems in organizing these new workbooks, which were the greatest challenge we'd undertaken. Because it is one thing, Chair, it is one thing to deal with the history of the 16th century, when nobody was around of those who are today, and only a few professional historians can judge you, and it is a very different thing to judge, as Mr. Ivancic said quite rightly, a period where everybody was alive for some part of the period, and some of them were alive for all of the period. Now, I want to quote Samuel Johnson. Samuel Johnson, in as long ago as 1742, said, "Distrust is a necessary qualification of a student in history." Very right. Any student of history needs very early to learn distrust of established texts and a critical approach to all texts, whether old or new. And so Samuel Johnson was rather ahead of his time, but he was quite right. What I hope you will do is to go away and read these books beginning with distrust. Yes, beginning with distrust. I don't want you to say, this has been produced by the centre, it is therefore right. I want you to write in and say, maybe I'll do it myself too. You know, that or that is a mistaken approach in my view, because we believe that the beginning of wisdom is asking questions. It is the critical approach to history. This is absolutely fundamental to our approach, and we welcome being subjected to the same approach ourselves. I want to make that very clear, because I think there is a danger when somebody produces something as big as this and as impressive as this, that people say, this is the received text. We know that it is not the received text. I know that in the period of the Yugoslav wars, which we have, in my view, a superb chapter, there are two events which are not in because they have not yet been historically proven. They will be, I think, or they may not be, if I am mistaken. But that's not the point. The point is that we confine ourselves to what we think can be demonstrated now, at this time of research, at this stage of research. Of course, when you're dealing with events only 15 years ago, it goes without any explanation that there will be further research, that there will be some changes in the account. But still, so close to the events, to get things as clear as humanly possible, that is, we believe, a major contribution. And in order for it to work, please, as you read them, determine yourselves, is it enough that it should be in English? Clearly not. If these books are of use, they will be of use in Albanian and in Serbian and in Bosnian and in Croatian and in Bulgarian, Greek, Turkish, all the languages of the region. Therefore, what we have done is only the first stage, and we will be pressing as hard as humanly possible, I hope with your help and with others' help, in order to get the support of the European Union in order to continue this contribution, as we believe, to the whole of Europe. And the third thing that I want, if, as you read, you are gradually convinced that this is something which is useful and good, is to consider whether such an approach should not be used in other parts of Europe. Are all parts of Europe without problems? Are the relations between nations and different groups without problems? Are we only in the southeast of Europe a group who has no hope? No, I do not think that's true for a moment. Fortunately, I am a citizen of two countries in Europe at the two different ends. So I know very well that there are problems at both ends. It is not just a matter of Southeast Europe. Yes, it was dramatically so in the 1990s, but now I do not think so, and I think that this is something which should be considered on a wider level. I shall finish by giving you a brief account of the greatest crisis that we had, which delayed us 2 months, in the process of producing these two last volumes. And it is very interesting, and I want you to know, because as you see, everything that I've said is to indicate how difficult it was and where we could be criticized. 4 readers read, of whom I was one, the draft. 2 of the readers, of whom I was one also, felt that certain countries in the second volume were not given their full attention, as much as should be given. And I want to recognize my colleague on the board, Carras from Turkey, because I was going to Turkey. I happened to be the Greek coordinator of the Greek-Turkish Forum. We were awarded the Papandreou Gem Award for working for Greek-Turkish relationship. I went to Istanbul and I said, Seljuk, I want us, and we sat down a whole afternoon to read the text as it then was. And at the end he said, Costa, you're right, this does not cover Turkish history. It's not a question of which side you take. It does not cover Turkish history adequately. And the books were held up, because Christina at once understood this and found an excellent Turkish historian whom we had not used before, and that was put right. We delayed the 2 books 3 months? 4 months? Something like that. It's all past. But the point is, it was an agony. It was a very difficult decision. But we took that decision because it was essential that those reading the text could, at the end of the day, say, yes, the country that I am from, or the country that I know, has been adequately covered even if I disagree on one small point or another small point. Finally, behind this demand for critical thinking is a demand for ethical values, as Christina quite rightly said. Of course, we might amongst ourselves slightly disagree on this or that ethical value. But above all, what we agree on is that we are human beings with responsibility for what happens in our world. And this effort for the last 20 years is an effort by all of us who have been involved to discharge that heavy but important and necessary responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carras, for this account and also for telling us a bit about what kind of problems you encountered and why you decided even to delay it in order to really have all the countries that played a role fully represented. And also in your final words asking for or saying that the demand is that each and every one needs to take responsibility and not just, as we've been saying, sort of talk about the others and not about ourselves. So now we've got 20 minutes. I'm sorry for that. Time here is always very short. 4 questions and answers. We have ministers, deputy ministers here from the... Yes, and Eduard Kukan as well, my colleague, but who said he can stay till the end. I would give him the word at the end. But if you want to speak right now, you can also. Otherwise, I would have wanted to give you the floor sort of at the end.
I will stay till then, but I would like to speak now.
Then go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It's really an honor to be co-host of this wonderful conference with the participation of so many interesting and powerful personalities. Let me say that this is clearly a successful project for the authors and everyone at Joint History Project. For in the last 20 years, they have put out 6 volumes, including the 2 presented today, in which they close the circle on the most recent and unfortunately also very bloody history of our continent. Congratulations on main motives of the JHP workbooks: critical approach, challenge national histories, offer a broad explanation of events, and encourage students talking about the other. This approach was carefully selected in order to overcome all the inherited biases. When looking at the diverse sources, I really appreciate the variety of sources used to give the full picture: national newspapers, political programs, caricatures, and speeches, especially in the later volume. I also like when students are asked to compare various documents on the same topic. It demonstrates that bias that naturally exists in the narrative of national histories. Hopefully these exercises help expose and eventually overcome that bias. Mapping contemporary history is an extremely difficult task. It deals with still live emotions, which were for some very painful and very personal. Everyone has that someone they lost, someone they heard of, etc. And these 2 workbooks are an example of diligent collaborative work of experts which aim to provide a critical, reflective, and objective, in this respect, meaning truthful retelling of the recent past. Allow me to make some personal comments. Education has a particular role in post-conflict societies, but during armed conflicts, education systems are discontinued, disrupted, in some cases even dangerous. This leaves a lot of children in their formative age outside the educational system, which creates a vacuum and disrupts the normal functioning of the society. And it also brings up an entire generation directly affected by war, despite the fact that the children themselves are not directly involved in the battlegrounds. A weak and disrupted educational system also leads to a less educated population, which is more prone to lean to extremism and populism. That is why the challenge of returning to normal is crucial for the post-conflict environment and ultimately for the reconciliation. And we should strive for this to happen the sooner the better. On one hand, education in post-conflict settings help to bring normal recovery to the society and the youngest generation. Second, going to school is part of an eye-opening experience, one in which students should be pushed to critical thinking. I would like to put two questions to our key speakers or experts. Question one, what experts have named cultural amnesia, impunity, or contentment are a big problem in post-conflict societies. There is also a somewhat controversial debate on closing the history books and amnesty in post-conflict. I will borrow one example from Africa. For instance, from Rhodesia, I quote, "Silence about the past was what the newborn country needed." Silence about the past. It's different continent, it's different country, but what would you say to that? And second one, would you be able to comment on the phenomenon of segregated schooling in the Western Balkans, notably in BIH, as we speak today on a common interpretation of history? How possible is it to achieve in a deeply divided society? And last comment, we have been discussing today the cases of the Western Balkans and Cyprus. But I would like to point out that this is a much needed exercise for many other countries, maybe in other parts of Europe, let's say Northern Ireland or in the region of the Caucasus. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Eduard, also for the two questions you put to our experts. The problem is we've got 15 minutes left for Q&A. So I'll leave your questions maybe for having at the end our two experts say something. So I can give the floor to, depends on how long you speak. If you speak just for 1 minute, then it can be like 5 or 6 people. I'm really sorry that isn't. I'm glad I have to say that